All right. Good morning. Well, good morning for us over here on the West Coast, but a good day to you all. Hello, welcome back. Hopefully you all had an amazing first day. I know we had a lot of great questions. Fortunately, Josh was able to answer a few. I know Yvonne was also answering a lot of those. And so today we're going to have time to answer more of those questions, and also time for Josh to provide some more tips for reactive Spring, and I guess, Spring related in general. So I don't know if you can hear my coworker screaming in the backyard. I have a 3-year-old coworker who's screaming as loud as possible. So hashtag stay-at-home work life. Am I right? Anyway, so I hope again all of you are well and rested and ready for a great hour of working on some more Spring stuff. Josh, are you there, buddy? Don't leave me hanging here. You got a mouthful of granola, muesli. Oh, there he is. I'm also sporting my new Tanzu hoodie I got in the mail. I don't know if you can see that, everybody.
How do I get one of those?
They sent out an email saying if you want one, fill this out. So scroll your inbox, check it out.
I shall.
I'm sure you don't have like 700 unread emails like I have. You probably have more than that, but it's in there.
Sir, it's more that you're disciplined and I'm not that I have more or less emails.
Oh, all right. Well, anyway, check your inbox.
I won't abide any other insinuation.
All right. Well, anyway, yeah, we're excited to have some more Spring tips from you today. Again, this is for an hour. Just to answer a couple questions, just in general, yes, this will all be posted. So if you missed yesterday or you want to go back and revisit yesterday and also today, we will be sending all of our recipients kind of an email afterwards saying, here's the links to all the information that you need, and possibly even the slides that Josh has. We do that, right? We get your slides, right, Josh? Is that a thing?
Yeah, all 4 of them.
Thing. Yeah, that's a thing. So anyway, so you'll be receiving an email with a follow-up saying, again, thanks for watching, and here's ways to view all of this again at a later date. So yeah, Josh, you ready to start firing away on the Spring tips?
Yes, sir. Yeah, and okay. I appreciate you kicking it off with such alacrity, my friend, and such, I don't know, it's just nice to talk to you. I really am happy.
Well, normally we get to see each other and embrace on the road and enjoy this fine world of ours, via travel. And sadly, we are only like a 25-minute drive from each other, yet so far away.
So far away.
It's good to see you, brother.
Yeah.
Likewise. I'm glad you're home safely from LA. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, the drive was uneventful.
Which is the best kind of drive. So. All right, well, without further ado, Josh Long, everyone.
All right. Okay, good stuff. Good stuff.
Hot sauce.
Good morning, everybody. I appreciate you being here as always. I'm trying to break myself of the facetious habit of using that ridiculous "Hey, cool cats and kittens" greeting from that TV series on Netflix that I know you saw. So bear with me as I resist the urge. I appreciate you being here. I know there's a lot of places you could be, so I appreciate that. As always, I'm going to start off this little code cook-off with a slide or two, the first of which is the one that contains my coordinates. So should you have questions, when ineluctably have questions, you can reach out to me. Don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm on the intertubes. There are my coordinates, my Twitter, my email, etc. I'm happy to respond there. My bona fides, right, and my bona fides are there as well. So I'm a Spring developer advocate on the Spring team, nearing 10 years, right? I'm so excited about that, actually. And I'm a Kotlin GDE. I'm a Java champion. These are titles, not job descriptions, but I'm just generally ensconced in the JVM and a very happy, very happy to be so. I am also happy to answer your questions. So again, reach out to me on those channels, those mediums, and I'm happy to communicate to correspond. A little bit about myself. I work on the Spring team. I've got videos that are on Safari on all sorts of different topics. I've got a book called Cloud Native Java, which is all about how to build applications that survive and thrive in the cloud. I have a podcast called The Beautiful Podcast, and I do a roundup of blogs called This Week in Spring. I do a video series called Spring Tips every Wednesday. It's on this YouTube playlist here, or it's just me looking at some corner of the ecosystem. And I have a new book that's nearing completion that you can buy now and read now and feedback on right now, even though it's not done, and you'll be entitled to the final edition. And I just found out I'm going to be doing a Twitch thing. I don't know when, don't know how, don't know where, just don't know yet. But the point is, you can definitely watch this space, or the general Tanzu space, and maybe we'll have something exciting to share. Oh, I'm so excited. So that's cool. Lots of good stuff. My friends, we have an interesting opportunity today. Today we're going to talk about Spring Tips. Now, Spring Tips, usually that's my video series, right? I just mentioned that video series here. And here I've got a number of different topics. These are just deep dives, me at the keyboard looking at some particular nuanced piece of the ecosystem, something in the ecosystem. So they're usually very focused, they're detailed, they're niche, and that's okay, right? Because you can self-select into them. You can find the videos, you can decide, okay, well, this looks interesting, and you can watch it, or just skip ahead to the next one. That's fine, right? We're very happy to have that either way. And it's not like a conference where you've got like one chance to see me, and it's like you hope it's not something that's completely irrelevant, right? You want something that's focused on or broad enough to be applicable, and if it veers into the territory of not having or not being 100% applicable, at least some percent applicable. Well, these Spring Tips videos are a little bit like that, a little bit like the opposite of that. These are very focused, and so the whole point is to deep dive, is to double click on a particular topic. So today we're going to do about an hour of Spring Tips, and now I've got one topic I wanted to talk about, namely configuration. But who knows? Who knows how long that'll be? Maybe I'll introduce Spring Integration or something like that, should I have an extra bit of time towards the end. Okay, so with that, my friends, as always, the one thing that's different about this presentation versus Spring Tips in general is that I don't start Spring Tips installments with slides. There's no slides. It's just literally the opening animation bumper and then right into the code. And every single one of these 70, 80 videos or whatever starts without fail here at start.spring.io. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to build a new application. I'm going to stop my video so as to preserve bandwidth there. I'm going to start my video, and we're going to go to start.spring.io, and we're going to build a new application called configuration. Now, this application is going to use the latest and greatest version of Java, as you should. I'm going to use the latest and greatest version of Spring Boot, again, as you should. We're going to build an application that uses, well, actually, for most of this stuff, we could actually just use this. We could just leave nothing here, and that'd be fine. But I do need a few other things that we're going to get to later. So we're going to use the actuator, the config client, the Vault configuration support, the Lombok support, the Reactive Webb support, and I think that's it, actually. I think that's probably enough. Oh, I want the configuration processor, right? I want that as well. And that done, I'm going to hit generate, and that'll give us a new project. And each project, I download, and I do this the long way around, right? Which, by the by, that should be the title of my next book. This zip file is something that I'm going to open up into my IDE, and I have a little handy script here called UAO. That script is something I wrote. It's it literally just unzips and opens. It runs unzip, and then it runs open in macOS, which opens up the artifact that you pointed it to. In this case, the IDE's pom.xml or Maven's pom.xml. That said, you could, in your IDE, go to File, New, Spring Starter Project in Eclipse, or go to File, New, and there's a mechanism here. There's a wizard there. NetBeans has a similar thing. Visual Studio Code has yet another one. All of which will actually front end the same start.spring.io experience, the same API. The start.spring.io is a web service, so you could have driven the creation of this artifact directly within your editor, and landed at the same place and skipped that whole unzip and open step. Okay, so for now, since we're doing some stuff that we've got some stuff in the class path that we don't need yet, I'm going to go ahead and comment it out just for the moment. Okay, so we're going to comment out that and that actually. Okay, we'll get all that, and I'll add this. And I just want Spring Boot starter, so that I have the absolute bare minimum in terms of Spring Boot present on the class path. And with that, I have enough to be able to, start. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about configuration. Now, configuration is an overloaded word, particularly in the context of the Spring ecosystem. And English is vast, and yet somehow we managed to chance upon the same word for two different things. First is there's Java configuration or XML configuration, or that kind of configuration. The configuration there refers to the use of some sort of artifact to describe to Spring how objects are wired together, right? That's different from the configuration that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the configuration properties, right? Property values. How do you get things that, how do you source values that can be used? Stringy values like data source URLs and passwords and usernames and things like that. How do you get all that and apply it to your application? So, and it turns out there's actually a huge story there. There's a whole, it's a really long sort of story that really starts back, back since near the very beginning, if not the beginning of Spring. We had in the original earliest versions of Spring support in the XML namespace for a property placeholder resolver. Okay, so this property placeholder resolver was an XML element that would load a property file, and then we could use that property file to then dereference property values in the XML. So you could actually write XML that had property names in it, and it would source them from that property file, I guess is the right way. That's awesome, right? That ability to do that, it was very interesting, but it was tied to XML, first of all, and it was tied to property files as well. So you didn't have full freedom to source the values from something else. You'd have to find some way to generate the property file and then put that into the build path or class path at least. So, good, but not great. So then eventually we got to Spring 3.0, and this is where things got really interesting. Way back in 2009, we introduced the environment abstraction. Now, the environment abstraction is it's a dictionary, basically. It's a thing that we can use to access whatever Spring knows about in terms of keys and values. So let's create a let's take a look. Okay, so we'll go here, class environment demo. Okay, and we're just going to create a class that gets initialized, and we're going to create a constructor. And we're going to inject the environment here, the org Spring Framework core environment, and we're going to look up some keys and values. Now, it turns out that Spring Boot knows about a lot of different keys and values, and so we're already well positioned. You can actually control how this gets created, but Spring does it for you now. In Spring 3.0 and Spring Framework 3.0 from 2009, long before Spring Boot, you would have had to configure this. You would have had to teach Spring certain things about the environment, but it's already done for us. And Spring Boot has already loaded it with plenty of different kinds of property sources. Okay, so Spring Boot already knows about, for example, environment variables. So I can say environment.getProperty home. Okay, and that gives me a value there, and I can log that out. So I say log for J and log.info home. Okay, good. Okay, run that, see what we get. Come on, go computer. Okay, compiling is the fun part. All right, so there you go, environment variable, users day-long, right? So it knows about environment variables. How does it know? Well, it also knows about system properties, right? So I can actually do this another way. I could say, let's just cut out the intermediate variable here just to keep things a little bit more concise. So I'll say log.info system property environment.get user.home. Okay, same thing, and these are essentially the same thing. In fact, the JDK, the JVM, creates that system property based on home, right? But it's well, home on Unixy things, and so you get the same result, right? System property, environment variable. I can ask Spring for this, these two things directly, right? That's what we want, is to be able to pull in that default information. Now, these values can also come from custom configuration, and many of you are no doubt familiar with application.properties. Application.properties is where I can actually specify all sorts of interesting other stuff. So for example, I could specify some of these default values, right? Spring has a lot of properties that it knows about, lots and lots and lots and lots of properties that you can use. And these are just the ones that apply to the entries on the class path, right? Were there more, then we would surely get more. Well, actually, these don't apply to all of them. These are a subset, I suspect, because I see some things that don't apply. But so maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's all of them. But either way, there's some things that are fairly common, right? Server port, right? I want to change the port to be 8081, right? And that actually customizes how the web server starts up. So for example, if I wanted to get that property, I could say log.info server.port environment.getProperty server.port. Okay. Now, of course, this is a value I'm getting from the server. Here it is, server.port. I may from the environment, but I'm, the default get property gives me a string, right? So you and I both know that this is an integer, or at least it should be. There's no such thing as a non-digit port. And so I can actually ask the environment, I can say, give me an integer, please. So I say integer.class, right? So now I've got the integer, and I can actually just assert as much by getting the class and getting the name. Okay, there we go. Run that. So the second parameter to integer from environment.getProperty is that. Okay. All right, Java lang integer. And so there's actually some conversion that happens that delegates to things like the conversion service in Spring, right? The conversion service is a general purpose thing. That would be a whole other Spring Tips video, but the conversion service is the registry of converters that Spring knows about to convert stringy things and all the different parts of Spring where it applies. So for example, in incoming web requests and validation and so on, the conversion service can have a part to that. But there's actually more than that involved. It could be something like the Spring Boot binder, right? So really, it's a larger discussion, and again, the topic for a whole other episode. So I have a server port now, and I have the environment. I can source values from server.port from this application.properties. Did you know Spring Boot can also give you YAML? So if you wanted to have all the benefits of property files with the hair loss inducing fury of Python's spacing sensitivity, then you can use YAML, right? So you can say application.yaml, and I could actually I could call this something else. So what are the messages do I want to do? YAML, let's say whatever, right? So it actually, your IDE will probably know what to do with that. Now I can say let's log out spring.flyway.mixed log.info spring.flyway.mixed environment.getProperty mixed, and of course this can be a boolean class. Good. Okay. All right. So it's false, right? We could have seen that coming. So okay. So it's working, right? We can use both things. And indeed, if you run your application, if you go to your console here and go to the terminal, let's say build it, Maven clean package, right? Like so. All right. Now I'm going to run the jar. I'm going to go to the command line here. I'm going to run the jar from the target directory. But before I do that, I'm going to create a file. I'll say echo server.port equals 9090 application.properties. Right? Now I'm going to do java -jar. Sorry, configuration.jar. So to review, we have configuration.properties. We have a configuration jar and application.properties. So java -jar configuration snapshot jar. Whoops. What does it think my version of Java is? Oh, 11. SDK list Java. Okay, and it wants me to use Java 14 since that's what I so intelligently chose. And you know, actually, I don't really need to do that. We can actually just use Java 11. I just use Java 14 and have it. Okay, so, okay, good. Maven -f clean package. CD target echo server.port equals 9090 application.properties. Okay, java -jar configuration.jar. And so server port equals 9090. So, you know, application.properties is a very important file. Spring knows what to do with it. Ditto for application.yaml. And these things get merged together and they all get fed into the environment. Okay. You can actually change where Spring looks for that that property file, right? So for example, one way to do that would be to use another property, imagine, right? So the property is called spring.config.name, but of course you can't provide that property in application.properties because the whole point is to use the property to tell Spring where to find application.properties, or rather what to find instead of application.properties. So one way to do that would be an environment variable. So I could actually say export spring_config_name equals foo, right? So here it's going to look for foo.properties, java -jar configuration. And you're going to see that all the things I've just done, where I print out these values that are being sourced from application.properties and application.yaml, no longer work, right? So here we go. Let's see, no pointer exception, right? When I try and do a type safe dereference of a configuration value. So interestingly, I could also have done that this way. I could have actually, you know, spring.config.name equals bar, right? And just run it from within the IDE. Same problem, right? It's looking for, well, it doesn't know where that file is, right? So it says server.port doesn't exist and blah, blah, blah. So there you go. So we can see that we got nulls for server.port. And then I started doing the casting to integer and string in it, and you can't do that with null, so it blew up. Okay, so this property, this feeds into where Spring can find the configuration values. Spring Boot knows about profiles as well. Profiles are yet another dimension for configuration in Spring. So the idea is that we can have a label, a tag that's associated with parts of your object graph. And when you activate globally this thing called a profile, Spring makes sure to instantiate or, you know, involve the objects that are so tagged. So for example, if you have objects that only apply in one context but not another, you might put them or hide them or conceal them under a tag, and then you know, revive them that way. So what's a good example? Well, the common example is dev and QA and prod and whatever. Now, keep in mind, there's a couple ways to handle this. There's a school of thought to which I adhere whenever possible that says that your application should not have environment specific configuration, right? We don't want to have environment specific configuration, but nonetheless, this profile mechanism can be still sometimes useful. So here, let's say I want to have configuration that's available in my default build environment, my local host environment where most of us who are writing code on a given project are going to spend our time. Okay, I can put that in application.properties. I could then choose to have some more production grade features enabled only in production. One way to do that, and again, I am really hard pressed to figure out where you would need this, but it has happened, right? You do sometimes you think of things where this is like, okay, well, I could do that. And really, remember, the alternative is, as we'll see, you can actually override things, right? You could use an environment variable, for example. So I could use an environment variable. I could say export server underscore port equals, and then I could just do that in production. That would have the effect of overriding the default. But there are some times when you want something that is only there for development, but it makes no sense in another environment. So I want to disable it, right? Or maybe it's the other way around. So this profile thing can be very useful. So let's say I created a profile file, application properties file called application dev, or better yet, application.prod.properties. Now the label that you use is utterly arbitrary, application hyphen whatever, right? So long as it's consistent. So here in prod, the server port will be 8888, okay? So long as my applications got the prod profile enabled, then that'll be loaded instead. So let's say system.property, and the way you set the profile is by an environment variable, either this, Spring profiles active equals, and we want prod, right? Prod, come on, prod, good. Spring.profiles.active equals prod, right? There you go. So that would be the configuration value there. If you want to just override it via the command line here before Spring starts up, as for testing, it's kind of useful. You could also do it here, right? Most of your IDE, most of the IDEs out there will have, for example, an environment thing where I can actually say Spring profiles active equals foo, right? And so I can comment that out. And you'll even see it. It'll announce that we're looking at a profile. Now, again, when you have a profile, it's going to read in everything from application, YAML, or properties. And then if that profile is active, it'll read in the stuff from application-prod or whatever profile you've decided to enable, right? And you can even see Spring Boot announcing that. It says the following profiles are active, foo, right? So I use the environment variable. Maybe here, I'll get rid of the environment variable. Okay. We'll go here, and we're going to return this one. We're going to use prod. So let's see what happens if I do that. It's going to override for the prod environment the configuration for the server port. So now it says server port is equal to 8888. All right, good stuff. So now we've got an application where I can override things. There's a very useful profile called default. And this is actually this is the one, I don't use custom environments, but I do use default. So default is assuming no other environment is active, then use this. And what I'll do is I'll make sure that in production, I use Spring profiles.active equals prod. I have nothing assigned to that. There's no particular properties assigned to that. But it'll mean that there's a profile active, which will disable default, right? Default is a special profile that only exists when no other profile is active. So I can say, okay, application default.properties, okay? And server.port here will be 7777, okay? So let's see what we get. Remember, we've got application.properties and default. So let's get rid of that. I'm gonna comment out this profile, run the application again. There you go. So we got the default value, right? So that overrides the application.properties and application.yaml, okay? Application YAML, application properties. So, default overrides application.properties. But again, these things get merged together. So if I have other values in here, hello config, right? If I have that value there, I can still get access to that. I can still dereference that property value. So log.info message in application.properties environment.get property. Good. Take two. right? So these things get merged together. Good stuff. Now, I'm using the environment. You can see that there's some nice mechanisms here. There's some nice facilities. I can get properties and convert them to a particular type. I like that. The property resolution, however, is very low level at the environment, right? Another mechanism that you could use is to use @value. So if I could go down here and I can say, okay, let's create a component class value demo, and I'll use this @value. And value is a Spring annotation that actually reminds me a lot of the old property placeholder syntax, right? And here I can just tell Spring to annotate parameters in my bean provider methods or my constructors or whatever as values that I want injected or to be resolved by resolving it against the environment. So this is still going to use the environment. It's just that it's a little bit more convenient. From if you were to do control, if you were to like look at this type and do control space, you would see there's an integer accepted as the first parameter. You don't know how that integer is being derived, so you could actually then source that from a different value for a test, but in Spring it would do the right thing, right? So here, let's log that out. Log for J, and notice that I don't have to worry about explicitly telling it what kind of type I want. I just say int, and it knows what I want. So int value server dot port. Okay, so good. Alrighty. So where'd it go? Value server dot port equals 7777. So good. So value is very convenient. And value has another benefit, which is that you can provide default values. So let's say I wanted to do a message, but if there is no message, I can just say hi, right? So, you know, value message. Okay. And here the message is a string, clearly, so I'll change that to reflect as much. @value server.port. Okay, so now I'm going to inject this message. We don't care about the port, but it's still there. So the message is, if there's a message environment property, then it'll use that. Otherwise, it'll give me a default value, whatever's on the right side, so it'll be high. So let's see right now, if I go to my application of properties, comment this out, run the application again. Okay, so I got high. The message is high, right? Not bad. I can go a step further. Did you know that? Yeah, I can actually do it nested, kind of like a ternary expression. So if message, great. If not, then use the thing on the right side, and that in turn can actually do a test. I can say, default message, right? I can use that, and if that's not there, then I can use high. So in this case, let's go back to application.properties. And you know, what's a good example of? We've already commented that out, so we need a simple message, whatever. Hiya. Okay, so just restart that. Oh, I said default message, didn't I? Oh, default message. Come on, take two, do the thing. Okay, so I got hiya, but now if I comment this out, I should get high, right? I've now got two levels of indirection there, two levels of interpolation, property placeholder interpolation. So now it says high. So you can see very, very convenient. I can try a number of well-known things, and this is good. For example, if you have, not that you've ever done this, but maybe I have once or twice, but where you have a bug where you accidentally fat finger the original configuration value, and then you decide to change it. And like, I still want to make the old one work, but you know, I prefer the new one if it's there. So I can have this all built into this very convenient interpolation string. Lots of different things you can do there. Okay, so now we've got values. Values they give you default values, they give you type safety, so I quite like them. I showed you already, I kind of alluded to this, but you can already kind of see this. The Spring Boot has a number of strategies for resolving properties, and there's a number of them that are provided out of the box thanks to PropertySources, right? So a property source is an interface, right? That's the wrong one. Property source. This looks more like it. Nope, that's not it either. There you go. This one. A property source is a simple type that teaches Spring how to source properties. And Spring Boot ships with a ton of them. Spring does as well, and we automatically configure them in Spring Boot. But you can see that Spring knows how to find configuration values in a lot of places. So I haven't really had to fiddle with this thus far. So if you want to get properties from application.properties or application.yaml, fine. If you want to get it from environment variables, fine. System properties, fine, right? If you're using the JOpt, this JOpt simple project, it'll work for that as well, right? We can do that. If you're using JNDI, so if you have an initial context and you're running your application in one of those traditional application servers, again, fine, it'll do the right thing there. It'll resolve that for you. And there's a hierarchy, right? So this is very much in keeping with the ideas of 12-factor configuration, right? The idea is that I want to have configuration that is independent of my particular environment. So, or rather, I want to have code that doesn't care, that doesn't have to be recompiled to accommodate different environment-specific configuration. So in this case, I can externalize that configuration. If I don't want to, I can put default values in the property files that are compiled into the jar that get shipped into production, but I can override those property values if I need to, using environment variables or using a property file that lives outside of the jar, or using JNDI, which again, I don't know why you'd be using JNDI, but you could, is my point. So there's a lot of different pluggable options here. There's lots of options here for resolving those configurations. There's even the ability to plug in your own property source, right? And that's actually a part of the environment abstraction. So let's do that. Let's actually go ahead and override the property source, or create a new property source rather. But again, keep in mind that hierarchy there. The hierarchy is meant to support, overriding default values. So the property files in your jar have the least priority. They're like at the last place, but you want some things to be checked first. And that's very much part of the abstraction here. So let's actually configure that. Now, you can configure a custom property source a couple of different ways, a few different ways, right? One is to do so at the configuration of the application itself. And you'd have to override the public static void main line here. So you say sources is going to be configuration application. That's going to be this one. Thank you. Dot class, and you're going to say dot run and pass in the arguments, and do dot I guess that's it. So we need that, and then we want to provide the initializer. So the initializers are where we get the chance to configure things. So we say new application context initializer, like so. It gives me a callback with the not yet started, but now almost completely configured application context. And here, I can get access to the current Spring environment, the configurable environment. I can get access to the mutable property sources, and that's a chain of property sources, and I can add a property source, right? So I can add it in whatever position I want, first, last, etc. Or I can even say I want this relative to another property source that's already in the chain. So in this way, I can control priority, right? Spring Boot does this for you in a very sensible way, but you can add custom things as well in whatever rank you want. So let's create a custom property source here. Okay, so class beautiful property source. So this is, again, far from the original day of not being able to source properties from anything but a property file. Here, we now have a generic mechanism that you can use to source them from anything you want. So if name should equal message, right? Return hello this dot get class dot get name. There you go. Otherwise, return null. Okay. So I'm going to plug in my custom beautiful property source there. This is upset for it needs constructor, right? Of course. Come on. Is that right? Still need a constructor. Right? There you go. And I typically just the argument that they want is the name of it, right? So you saw that there's a add last, add first, whatever. The first parameter, if you do add, add before, add after, the first parameter is the name. So you can find the other property source names and then use that as a clue so that this can be slotted before or after. But in my case, I don't care. I'm just going to make this the first one, right? So new beautiful property source. Okay, so now that's going to be called beautiful. If somebody wants to slot their property source before or after this one, then they can. Okay, so now I've put myself in front of all the other resolvers. So when somebody asks for the message, they should, if everything goes to plan, get our beautiful property source value, not the one sourced from the property files. Okay, so hello, beautiful property source. So we've now overridden the default. That means you can talk to anything you want. I hope I don't have to spell this out for you, but you want to talk to your database, you can just write a JDBC property source. You want to talk to, you know, some hodgepodge or consortium of like property files sitting on your file system, you can do that. If you want to talk to whatever, right, anything you want. If, by the way, we don't already do that for you. There's a number of different property sources out there, some of which we've already seen, but many of which we have not. So keep that in mind. Don't write your own yet. There might be opportunities there for reuse. And again, this is really convenient because now you can teach Spring about other kinds of configuration values. Now, this is one way to do it. Like I said, is this the best way? This requires that the user actually be aware of your property source and they explicitly invoke it or involve it in the code. I don't like that as much. I quite like it when I can ship something and it's on the class path and it just gets plugged in automatically. And so in Spring Boot, we make heavy use of the service loader mechanism in Spring. And so I can create a directory here, meta-inf, and I can create a file called spring.factories. And there I can provide an environment post-processor. So I need to create an environment post-processor to take advantage of this, but the idea is that my environment post-processor gets a first bite at the apple. So I can say class beautiful environment post-processor. Okay, implement environment post-processor. And here, you know, I get the configurable environment just as before, and I get Spring application. So the Spring application is the, it's not an initialized application yet. You don't have access to all the beans in your context, but you do have the ability to get all the sources, get class loaders, get all the initializers, get listeners, get the main application class, get the type of application, is a web application, you know, everything you can possibly get without actually talking to other beans in the context. It's all here. And so you can use this to make informed decisions and to change the behavior. You could actually say, do I want to add an initializer? Do I want to do whatever? Do I want to do set default properties, keys and values, right? That kind of stuff. You can do all sorts of stuff there. But for us, what we want to do is get the environment, right? We've already got the environment there. And same basic thing. We're going to add first new beautiful property source, okay? So all I'm doing is I'm just explicitly configuring this property source in this environment post processor, spring.factories. All right. So I'm going to put that there. And I should have commented out the public static void main. Did I do that? Yes, I did. So now there's nothing. In fact, you can even see the problem, right? Before I created this, nothing referenced this anymore, right? Because you know there's no Java config using it. So the only thing that's using that is this, and IntelliJ happens to be smart enough to know that I'm referencing this in my config file. But if it didn't, then you know there's no static analysis that would look at just the Java code and think that this is being used, because it's not. It's only being used by the service loader. So we should get the same result if we run the application. All right, so we got that. It worked. Hello, beautiful property source. We can add this last, and we should get the default value that we had, right? The one in our inbuilt property file. What did I do? Hello. Oh, did I comment it out from application.properties? Yeah. So hello config. There you go. So I got hello config. And if I go here and I make this first, again, it should jump to the head of the line. We can run the application again. Good. Okay, so you can see how that works. Very, very convenient. So now imagine as an organization, you can put the stuff in the class path, ship it into the organization as an artifact repository, you know, Artifactory or Nexus or whatever. And now whenever somebody adds your Spring Boot auto configurations or whatever, they can transitively bring in this environment post processor. You can now make it so that all your applications can talk to a well-known blessed configuration source of some sort. Okay, so thus far we've looked at low-level mechanisms to get configuration into the environment. We even looked at some higher-level mechanisms like @value. @value gives us some relative type safety. That said, wouldn't it be nice if I could actually get things bound to my just job objects rather than me having to pluck them via strings from the environment or from as keys and values that I can then inject as values? Wouldn't it be nice if I could just have those things given to me as Java objects, very much in that inversion-of-control style that we like from Spring, right? We associate with Spring. Right now, I'm writing strings. I'm looking up keys and values. It's not as bad, but it would be nice if I didn't have any of that in my code at all. And so we can actually use something called configuration properties. Okay, this is a Spring Boot mechanism. So here I'm going to create a bootful properties object, and this is going to have a message property. And the configuration properties object has to have a prefix, and I'm just going to call it bootful. And it has to have, getters and setters, right? So there's that. Now, nothing in, I haven't told Spring Boot about this yet. So IntelliJ in this case is helpful to remind me. It's marking this as an error. It's saying, hey, you didn't register this configuration properties file, this configuration properties class via enable configuration properties. So let's do bootful properties dot class. Okay. Now run the application, and what I want to do is I want to configure this value. So I'm going to say private int favorite number and message. So I can go to my property files, or I can go to anything else that we've looked at, including the command line, environment variables, whatever. And by the way, keep that in mind. If this is bootful favorite number, then I can go to my property file. Here I can say bootful dot favorite number equals 42. But I could also just as easily, as an environment variable, say export bootful favorite number equals 42, right? And there are actually rules for how Spring Boot normalizes these keys and values. You can't use dots, you can't use periods and hyphens in environment variables, but so you can look up the documentation for the particular rules there. But basically, we normalize your inputs. All right, so bootful.favorite number and bootful.message equals hello configuration properties. All right. So here I've got that. Now I'm going to use that. I'll say at component class configuration properties demo, and it'll be bootful properties BP, and I'm going to use a logger. Good. Log.info configuration properties. BP.getMessage, get favorite number. And again, the types are implied in the properties to which we bound the configuration values. So we don't have to be explicit about that as we did earlier with the environment. Okay, so that's working as well. So there we go. Hello configuration properties and 42. Very convenient, right? Now we've got type safety. We've got the ability to bind to Java objects. I don't know which keys and values are available to me though, right? So as I'm using this, like my IDE doesn't know about this property called favorite number. One way to get around that is to use the environment, to use the Spring configuration processor. I've got that in the class path here. You have to build your application. You have to build the code. So go to your command line and do a maven clean package, And what that'll do is it'll generate an index based on the configuration properties Java objects in your code. And that index will then feed into, what is the issue here, friends? Oh, it's the environment variable. Well, let's just do it here. Okay, so cd configuration maven clean package. I've got that Spring config name thing there. That's why that broke. Okay, so there we go. Now I've just regenerated the index. Now if I go to my IDE and tell it to re-import, and I could then go to property files, right, like application.properties, suddenly I can command click on these numbers, these properties. Bootful.favorite number corresponds to that. And in fact, I can do bootful, I can just type in bootful and I can get, well, I've already got it here. Let's comment that out. I can get auto completion. Beautiful favorite number equals 42, right? So now I've got type safety even in my configuration property files themselves, which is great. And you can actually ship Java configuration classes, auto configuration, that takes advantage of that mechanism, right? So if, you know, Spring Boot has a lot of auto configuration. So server auto configuration, right? For example, right? And we use in those auto configurations that ship in Spring Boot or Spring Cloud, we have @enable configuration properties, OAuth2, for example, and then the prefix is spring.security.oauth.resource server. So whenever you use server.port, what you're getting is a configuration property. Okay, so we've got type binding, we've looked at that, we looked at configuration processors. All of this is in Spring Boot itself, but one of the really most exciting opportunities here is to be able to source configuration values from an external service. So one thing you can use is Spring Cloud Config Server. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to start.spring.io and build a new service, config service. And this config service is going to act as a facade. It's going to front end a Git repository that has configuration in it. Okay, so I'll hit generate, and the configuration can live in a file system, a file store of some sort. By default, it's going to be Git, but you can use Subversion. I think there's support for MongoDB, etc. But I typically prefer Git because Git is version controlled, because it has the ability to do all sorts of kinds of encryption. You know, you can do, you can lock down the communication between the config server and the Git repository, etc. Now, the config server itself is a service, right? So it needs some configuration to be able to do its work. @enable config server. Now, keep in mind, this configuration server, I'm going to do a very default, lightweight, open, like completely open, not secure at all, config server. But that said, if you're using something like you know, our platform pivotal application, no, Tanzu application service, the Cloud Foundry variant, we have support for providing for provisioning a fully secured, fully integrated, you know, environment aware config server, and you can use that. If you're using Azure Spring Cloud, there's one that you can pre-provision that way, right? So a lot of folks have hardened this and then shipped it as a service that you can just point and click and you get it. You can provision a new one or do it programmatically, right? Okay, so here, in order for this to work, I'm going to run this on a different host and port, server.port equals 8888. And I'm going to point it to a Git repository. And the Git repository here is https github.com Josh Long greetings config repository .git. Let's make sure that all works. Nope, not at all. Missing a G or too many G's or something. Okay, so the URL is what they need. Paste that in there. And you can see I've got some property files, beautiful.properties and greetings.properties. Okay, so each microservice will get one property file in addition to application.properties. So if I put in application.properties, that would get brought in, and then beautiful.properties would override that, and both of these things would override the default inbuilt application.properties. Okay, if you have one in your jar. So this is my new config server. All I had to do was configure this, and I used a hard-coded string here, but again, there's no reason you couldn't have said export spring _ cloud _ config _ server _ git _ URI equals, and then in an environment variable. So you can use environment variables to configure the config server, which can then talk to the right Git repository, you know, your development versus Q&A versus production versus whatever. Okay, so that's up and running. I go back to my application. I want it to talk to the config server. So I'm going to bring in the Spring Cloud Starter Config dependency here. And I'll bring in the Spring Boot actuator, as we'll need that in just a second. Okay, Shift R. Okay, good. So we've got that. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to source a configuration value from this beautiful.properties, which means I need to give the config server some sense of how to identify itself so that when it talks to the config server, it'll know what property file to pull down. So my name should henceforth be beautiful, right? It's going to be spring.application name equals beautiful. But that said, that is itself a configuration value. So you see the problem here. It's a classic chicken and egg. I'm going to have an application talk to a service. It's going to present a name that is going to be then used to resolve the configuration for the rest of the application. So I need something that gets loaded earlier. And here, there's a file called bootstrap.properties. And this is specifically for things like this, where I'm going to bootstrap some information, right? So Beautiful is my service name. I could tell it where to find the config server here, right? But by default, it's going to be localhost 8080 8888 like that. So I don't typically do that for this, but again, in production, you would certainly want to do something like that. You would want to override that. Okay, so what configuration? Message from config server. I'm going to inject that here. I'll say at component class config server demo, config server demo at value, like so, string config server. And I'm just going to log it out as before. Whoop. Config server value. Okay, run. Okay, it's in there somewhere, surely. Config server value, bonjour Spring Cloud config server. Okay, so it's there. Now, what if I wanted to change this, right? Well, Spring actually has a mechanism, an event you can listen to. There's actually a couple things you can use. One is at refresh scope, right? If you use that, Spring will make your application, it'll make this bean, it'll reconfigure this bean based on whether the property file has changed, the value has changed. And the way it will know to look to see if it's changed is if you trigger a refresh event. Now you can use refresh scope. I quite like something else. I quite like this other mechanism, which is an event listener. And this means that even if I'm not looking for a particular property, I get full control over how I reconfigure myself. So I can say public void on refresh, and I'm going to listen for a refresh scope refreshed event, okay? And I'm going to log out this. I'll say log out new configuration. And here you might get access to the environment, right? You might say private file environment. Okay. Required args constructor. Good. So that environment is going to come in. It's going to be provided for us. And if something in the backing property sources should change, then I'll see that. So this will be invoked the first time the application starts up, but it'll also be invoked whenever the property value changes. So let's go ahead and restart this without having changed the value just yet. Right? I haven't done anything. And the refresh event, by the way, you can access it for things like what has changed, the name of the thing, the source, etc. But I don't care. Okay, so do we have bonjour? Okay. Oh, it didn't even get a chance. So let's start up the web application first. That way it stays up. Okay. We're going to run about 3 or 4 minutes long here, friends. Sorry about that. Okay, so the application's up and running. Now it's connected to the config server. I could get the initial value. What I should have done perhaps is to enable that, leave that in there, and so I can use the environment. I can say, okay, give me the environment, like so, or give me a configuration properties. And I can say environment.get property. I want the string, so private string message. This dot message equals environment.get property, like so. Good. There's the configuration value, and then I can log it out. Okay, so here I can say log, just whatever. Void refresh. This dot message equals. Let's just do that. I'll just use this same logic twice. Log.info config server message. Good. So this dot environment equals environment, and I can do a refresh, right? And then down here, same thing. This dot refresh. Okay, let's try that out. So No need for that. Thank you. Now this mechanism is great if you have some things that might change. Maybe the service to which you're talking has changed. Maybe your data source has changed, and you don't need to restart the application, right? So here I've got the config server message, right? I get that once, but let's go change it now, right? So I can change it by going here to my Git repository, right? I need to be logged in. That's tedious. Come on. So edit this. Ni hao. Okay. Good. There's my configuration for that. And what I want to do is I want to trigger a refresh event. And the way you do that is there's an endpoint, an actuator endpoint in Spring Boot. In order for that actuator endpoint to be available, you need, guess what, more configuration. So management include everything. Okay, so once that's there, the refresh event is accessible, and then I can trigger a refresh event from the command line or from any HTTP client, etc. So I have to say, curl HTTP localhost 8080 /actuator /refresh. Okay. Minus T, right? I'm going to send nothing. I'm going to send a payload of nothing. And I have to specify a content type of application JSON. Okay, so now the application started up. We can see the configuration. There's the original one, right? Let's go change it again because I had to restart because I had to enable the actuator environment. So go here. Okay. Buongiorno. Okay. So I've changed the configuration here. Now I'm going to tell Spring Cloud to refresh itself. Which one? Oh, it's 8081, of course. Okay, 8081. Hello. Which port are you on? Port 7777. I've got so much configuration, I forget which value is being used at any given time. Okay, curl to the actuator endpoint. And you can see it announced that these values have changed. And then it printed out buongiorno. Okay, so I've got the configuration value from the config server. Very convenient. Now, I like the Spring Cloud config server. It's version controlled. That means I can see who changed what and when. I can do auditing. I can roll back. I can also do encryption, right? There's actually support for providing a key that can be used to encrypt values. That said, when it comes to security, when it comes to encrypted values, one industry standard that people often use is something like Hashicorp Vault. Now, Hashicorp Vault is yet another very popular piece of infrastructure, so we can actually store configuration there as well. So for our last trick, let's actually very quickly look at how to resolve configuration values from Hashicorp Vault. I've got that running on my local machine here in demo mode, like in dev mode, basically in the least secure setting at all. But the benefit of Hashicorp Vault is that operations knows how to operationalize it. It's got very good support for encrypting values and storing them in a secure way and requiring so many keys so that nobody can get access to it unless you have all the right keys and so on. Okay, so it is a vault. I want to treat those configuration values as just keys and values, just like I would any other thing. So I need to change some configuration. Okay, so in my application, I need to update bootstrap.properties to take advantage of the Hashicorp Vault token. So spring.cloud.vault.token equals, and I'll create an environment variable there called vault token. And the other thing I need is to change the scheme. So spring.cloud.vault.scheme equals HTTP because I'm using the non-secure dev mode, right? And then for the only thing you're going to need is to make sure that you've got a configuration value in your Vault instance. So let's do that. Let's go ahead and add something to Vault. So here it says export Vault address equals localhost 8200. Skip verify, sure. And I'm providing a development, local token of 00000, etc. I'm saying Vault KV put secret, and then Beautiful is the application name, and then the message itself, the key is message from Vault server, and then hello Spring Cloud Vault. So if everything goes to plan, I should now be able to go down here, and just like before, I should be able to reference that or to log it out, right? So vault demo at value string vault demo. Okay, at log4j and log.info vault demo. All right, so there's the value from vault, just like before. And we're just going to restart. And again, the refresh scope would work here as well, because it doesn't matter where the property value is coming from, right? I showed you it in terms of Spring Cloud's config server, but if the value is coming from Vault, if it's coming from anything, that'll work as well. There we go, my friends. Message from Vault server equals hello Spring Cloud Vault. There you go, my friends. We've looked at a number of different things today. We've looked at a number of different ways to integrate your application with other configuration sources. Obviously, just the beginning, there's actually property sources in the various Spring Cloud implementations that you might be interested in. So for example, the Azure Key Vault, the Google Cloud Runtime Configuration API. If you're using Kubernetes, you can use config maps, right? There's a lot to be done there. There's even, if you're using Arceus from Netflix, you probably don't need it, but if you are, then there's good support for that as well. So and that's just off the top of my head list of the other property sources out there that you might be interested in. And if you can see, it's trivial to override and provide your own, right? So hopefully in this brief bit of time, you've gotten a sense of what's possible and what kind of opportunities we have for configuration, for secure, refreshable, operationalizable, version controlled, type safe configuration. And I appreciate, as always, your time. I hope you're staying healthy and safe, and I'm happy to answer questions now.
Yeah, Josh, we have 3 questions. First of all, thank you so much. Yay! So if you want me to read them to you, or do you want to click down and just go to there's 3 questions over there. And then we'll have to bounce after that, but obviously if you can take a quick step.
Yeah, Q&A, okay. How do you test the reactive Spring stuff? Yeah, so I would use the step verifier, stepverifier.create. It's a capital S, capital V in the test class, and you say stepverifier.create and pass in a publisher, and then after that you'll say .expect next, and then after that you'll say verify complete. So expect next .asterisk, where asterisk is one of the different methods that you can use, and you can use that to assert certain things about what's going to be emitted from that stream. So for example, if you make a call to a database and you're expecting 2 results, you can say expect next count 2, right? And then say verify complete. And that'll force the publisher to, it'll basically block, it'll wait for the results to arrive and let you assert certain things about the responses that come out of that. For a lot more on this topic, and I mean a lot more, I have a talk called Beautiful Testing. And you can just look for my name, Josh Long, Beautiful Testing. You'll find this talk out there, and it covers end to end from the simplest unit test all the way to microservices and in the context of reactive applications. So we go from 0 to Spring Cloud Contract and microservices and distribution and so on. It's all reactive. Is it not advisable to use reactive streams here and there for asynchronous tasks? You can, you should. Yeah, I would. That's what I'm saying. I can't imagine using anything else now, right? It's you've got one very consistent API, which is what we want. That's a question that we just got, which I appreciate. Another question, for those of us who are not using version 5 yet, would you jump from 3 to 5 directly to take advantage of Spring 5 features, or go to Spring 4 first? Yeah, go to 5. I wouldn't, there's no use for Spring 4 at this point. I wouldn't bother. Yeah, there are going to be some deltas, of course. There's going to be some changes, but that's true for everything, and you might as well just get it over with. Can we use save configurations in the database instead of Git using Spring Cloud Config Server? Absolutely. You can use I think MongoDB is supported as a back end there, so that's one option. And you can plug it in. It's Spring after all. We have abstractions. What are the best log must-have levels in the production environment you would suggest? I don't know. That's up to your granularity of logging, right? I wouldn't enable debug in production, of course, but I would definitely enable warn and error and things like that, and info. So how do you dynamically load Git repository configuration without restarting config server? Is that a chicken and egg problem? I don't know. That's a great question. Do you point that to another config server and then have that be have the config server itself be a config client from another config server. Hi, property overrides feature for config server. It always resolves the default value and ignores the one provided by config client. I'm not sure. I would have to I'm not sure I understand the question. So I encourage you to send me an email or josh@joshlang.com and we can take it offline because I don't understand. It sounds like it's going to be more involved than just this. Any plans to add RSocket support in Spring Cloud config to make refreshing of properties simpler instead of using Spring Cloud? You know, that's a great point. So right now, one thing I didn't mention, friends, is I used the actuator endpoint to tell Spring Cloud, to tell my single instance of my microservice to pull down the configuration values. And instead of doing that, I could use the Spring Cloud bus. And I could even go a step further. I can use a webhook. And so Spring Cloud bus is basically a broker, Kafka, RabbitMQ, whatever. And events that are sent in one microservice can be then sent on the bus, and all other microservices will get the same message. So for example, if I send a refresh event, there's no reason I couldn't send that on the bus by going to actuator bus/refresh instead of just refresh. And then that will force all microservices to refresh themselves, no matter where the original request or event happened. And that works because we federate the message by using the event bus to send the message around all the microservices. So that's awesome. But it still requires a piece of external infrastructure, right? The effect is that you can refresh, 10 microservices or 100 microservices whenever one configuration value changes, but you still need Kafka or RabbitMQ, right? So the question is, can we use something like RSocket, which is ideally suited for that kind of pub sub stuff? Yeah, I don't see why not. We haven't done it. I'm not sure if we are going to do it, but Spring Cloud Bus, the abstraction is not too terrible because it's just using, I think at some level, it's using Spring Cloud Stream, and I think we even have a Spring Cloud Stream RSocket thing coming along, so that's good. Can Spring Cloud config work with offline private hosted GitLab repository access? Yeah, you can. Any Git repository. I just use GitHub, and I used Open because it works. But any Git repository will work. You could use Subversion too. You could actually use a regular file system. But I want version control. I want that security. I want that, and I want the layers of authentication that are implied in that. Any better way to use parallel flux for simultaneous call to the remote microservices? I talked about a number of them yesterday. So I think we talked about a number of them. We talked about things like assembler and the third-party assembler. We talked about zip, and we talked about lots of operations there. I'm not sure really how to
maybe
speak to that
they
question.
need to just go back and relook at that video, and we'll be sending yesterday's whole talk and today's whole talk. You'll be able to watch those online at your leisure, whenever. So what's nice is people have lots of questions, but we are 14 minutes over now, and so I need to respect other people that have. So everybody, please stop with the questions, and then Josh will answer these last three, and then we'll be done.
But also, my email is josh@joshlang.com, and my Twitter direct messages are @starbucksman, STARBUXMAN. They're wide open. I'm happy to answer. Okay, can we run Spring Boot apps using java-jar app.jar in production without Docker or Kubernetes infrastructure because the customer thinks it's too much infrastructure? Yes, of course. I just did it. You're going to lose out on all the operations features that you get from an honest-to-goodness platform like Kubernetes. Nothing's going to restart your service. You have to do it yourself. Nothing's going to manage, all the stuff that Kubernetes manages, basically. But yeah, you can do that. I just did it. I just did it all day here in the last hour. There's nothing. We don't require Kubernetes to run Spring Boot. I guess what I'm trying to say. Do you recommend JavaScript for encrypting properties? Don't know what that is. So
maybe JavaScript for encryption. I don't know. Maybe it's just
I don't know. Yeah, maybe. How do I identify profiles? Yeah, just name it. I would see how far you can get without profiles. See if you can go the entire application and not have a profile. And if you do have it, make it just default. That should be the only one that you might use. I find it kind of a smell to use something like prod dev Q&A because that means you've got, you should have so few changes from one environment to another that those few changes that you do have can be expressed as overrides through environment variables or through the occasional Spring Cloud config override or something like that. config server override.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Nailed it. Thank you, sir.
Go Spring.
Yeah, go Spring. And again, Josh has so many amazing videos, and a lot of the members from his team, of course, have videos. So if you go to youtube.com and type in Spring, there's so many great videos to watch, and just keep educating yourself on all things that are Spring, Reactive Spring, Microservices, all that wonderful stuff. So Josh, I can't thank you enough. I can't thank our team enough. Newt, Jamie, Paul, Tasha, Yvonne. Also want to just a quick reminder, next month we will have another Spring One tour. It's evolving. One of our speakers had to drop out, so we're adding another, but just check into that space, springonetour.io, for the new update, which will be happening within the next couple of days. We'll let you know the new fantastic material. Of course, we've got the Spring One virtual conference September 2nd and 3rd. Go to springone.io, register, check out all the tracks. Yours truly will be there. Josh will be there. The whole Spring team will be there. So it'll be 2 days of all things amazing Spring. And we're also gonna have some fun, like just like hangout stuff, you know, not just content, but just other things to interact with on the computer. So that'll be a lot of fun. Sadly, we won't be there in person, but this will be the next best thing. And VM World, of course, is happening at the end of September, September 29th through October 1st. Go check out that at vmworld.com. Again, so many great tracks to follow, from infrastructure all the way up to development. And if you haven't been to tanzu.vmware.com, our developer space, it's amazing. We are adding content all the time, video-wise. We have our Tanzu Tuesdays, which I host with Paul Tchaikovsky and Tiffany Jernigan, and we have great presenters every week. We've got Ryan Baxter coming on next week. He's going to be talking about Spring plus Kubernetes. So just come learn from us. We have so much great information. We're trying to share it, and tanzu.vmware.com has all these great ways to learn. Blogs, Josh puts blogs up on there. We have the tanzu.tv site, which has, again, a lot of content. So I don't know. I just want you guys to continue to grasp all of our great things that we can provide for you, and have fun and use it towards your advantages. Whew, we did it. So again, thank you so much. Please stay safe, everyone, and we will see you next month on the Spring One Tour. Yeah. Smile, it's free.
Stay safe, everybody.